So welcome to our Scholars Chat series, number 3, the third of our series. And this one's entitled Pivoting and Changing Your Research Program and Scholarly Identity. And thanks so much for coming and to all our speakers. So I'll just introduce our panel and our speakers today. Myself, I'm Michelle Howard from the Department of Family Medicine at McMaster, and Teresa Chan from Faculty Development at McMaster, and Elizabeth Alvarez from McMaster as well. We're the organizing committee, and we're really glad today to be able to introduce our discussants, Dr. Lehana Thabane and Dr. Jeffrey Weitz, and I'll just tell you a little bit about them first. So Dr. Weitz is a professor of medicine and biochemistry and biomedical sciences at McMaster University and executive director of the Thrombosis and Atherosclerosis Research Institute and president of the Council for the International Society on Thrombosis and Hemostasis. He has numerous publications and book chapters and awards, a fellow of the American Heart Association, the Royal Society of Canada, and the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. And in the context of today, we'll be talking about all of the mentorship work and teaching and mentorship of faculty and learners as well. Thank you so much for joining us and bringing your expertise today. And our other discussant is Dr. Lehana Thabane, Vice President of Research at St. Joseph's Healthcare in Hamilton, and Professor of Biostatistics and the former Interim Chair of the Department of Health Research Methods, Evidence, and Impact. And Dr. Thabane is a clinical trials expert and is editor on journals relating to clinical trials, has co-authored over 900 peer-reviewed manuscripts, and has mentored over 200 graduate students and junior faculty, and is also here to talk about that part of his role, and won several teaching and mentorship awards for building capacity in health researcher and nurturing the next generation of researchers. So I'm going to ask our speakers to start discussing a couple of questions. And so we're going to ask them to talk about career transitions really in two major ways. The very early stage career from a trainee or postdoc, and what are the transitions like going into your academic career? And then also they'll be speaking a little bit after a few minutes about going from that early stage and then going into later career decisions or mid-career decisions. So maybe I'll ask you first to our guests, how do you move from a postdoc to a faculty position? Can you describe what that's been like in your mentorship, and what are the considerations and inspirations and pitfalls and things to be aware of?
Well, let me take the first stab at that question. And I think it's important for someone who's moving from the postdoc to a first faculty position to establish their own area of research. Often it's possible to have a discussion with the postdoctoral fellowship supervisor to determine whether you can take a part of your work with you and have that as your own, or at the very least, maybe take techniques and reagents with you if you're going to do bench-based research to get started in your own career. But trying to establish your own identity that's distinct from your postdoctoral supervisor is an important part of establishing yourself in your first faculty appointment. And that's, I think, an important part of the negotiations that need to go on with your postdoc supervisor before you make the move. And often your postdoc supervisor is your best friend at helping you to find faculty positions. Lehana, do you have something to add to that?
A few years ago, Dave Sackett wrote what he calls success criteria for clinician scientists. And he had 3 things that in his experience over the years, he saw as key ingredients for success. 1, get yourself a mentor right from the beginning. 2, time management, because it is one of the biggest problems that everyone faces. It's even more imperative for junior faculty or people who are studying their academic career to have one. Make sure they are good at time management. The second thing is you can't really manage your time well, or at least be conscious how you spend your time, unless you have set goals. So goal setting is the third one. So I would certainly say today, those three remain as important as they had been many years ago when Dave wrote about these issues. And when I talk to my own mentees or people transitioning from, postdocs or graduate students into a faculty role, I said those remain three of perhaps the top things to think about. And I want to say again about mentorship. This is where you're now separating the role that many of the people may have played in your life who are supervisors, whose role may be to get you through your academic requirements. Now, your mentor, when you become a faculty, someone is going to think about your career in a global fashion. And you need to have a deliberate discussion with someone who can play that role. That would make the difference between you succeeding and not succeeding.
I can't stress the importance of mentorship enough. And as the associate chair for research for the Department of Medicine at McMaster University, I interview all of the new recruits, and whether they're coming on in the research stream or the clinician educator stream, I always ask them about mentors, whether it's going to be mentorship for research activities or mentors for educational activities. And it's a danger signal if mentors have not been identified. And if they haven't, I work with the individual to make sure that appropriate mentors are in place. And mentors don't have to be fixed. They can change. You can add mentors as you move through your career. And there may be some more appropriate mentors that you identify as you move further along your career. And it's not just mentorship in terms of your own research program, but it might be, as Lehana says, is career planning and getting you to where you want to go.
To add to it, remember one of the three issues is goal setting. It's usually a daunting task for many people who are studying their career. How do I set my goals? How do I even know what my goals are, other than I know I want to be promoted to become an associate professor at some point? That's where your mentor could also become very helpful to you, to help you think about your goals in general. As an academic, we tend to really think about three areas of focus, which is your education, your research, and your service. And your mentor can help you to set goals in those three areas. If you're a clinician, of course, you do have clinical service as part of it. But certainly having a mentor can help you to think about your goals and think about evaluation metrics of how you're going to see that you're being successful in all those goals. And certainly make sure that they're also aligned with the goals of the institution, which then comes to the goals of the faculty and the goals of the department. Because you really don't want to be pursuing goals that will get you into conflict with your chair of the department when you have an annual career review.
And for clinician scientists, it's very hard sometimes to carve out protected time for research because of clinical demands. And that's one of the duties of your mentors, is to help the individual to carve out a sufficient amount of protected time to enable success in research. A little bit different for the people who aren't clinicians. Their primary focus, if they're research oriented, is going to be on the research. But for clinicians, balancing patients and balancing research are tough because patients always come first, and you have to have a setup where you can be free from those activities to focus on your research.
Now, going deeper into time management, one of the realities of starting a new academic career is it's often a struggle of how do I balance my work and my personal life. With a mentor, that's where you can actually make sure that part of your goals include your own family, to make sure that they don't feel neglected as you're trying to build a career. And therefore, you could actually manage your time in such a way that your family remains a priority. I often use as an example a lesson I learned early in my career where I went for a time management training. And the instructor asked what the most important thing was for all of us who had attended the workshop. And the first response was family. And he said, how many of you believe family is the most important? All of us raised our hands, myself included. And then the next question was, how many of you have ever received a call from a family member when you're in a meeting and you either ignored the call or you quickly responded to the call saying that, sorry, I'm in a meeting, I can't talk to you? We were all guilty as charged. And then the question was, how could this be the most important thing to you when given the opportunity to demonstrate it, you actually behave otherwise? And the reason being, we don't often think of how to incorporate our families into our planning of how we use our time. And that often becomes a problem, especially when you're studying a career. So I use that as an example to all my mentees and say, look, if your family is important, make them part of your goal and make sure you have protected time to support them.
Yeah, and of course, the granting agencies don't help you because they have their grant deadlines sort of at the end of the summer or right around after Christmas or something like that, just to make your life more difficult. But it's absolutely right. You have to take time to spend with your family as well as the time to focus on your educational and research activities.
Elizabeth has a question, if you don't mind taking a question from.
Yeah, no, these are great examples. Thank you so much. I wanted to go back a bit. Jeffrey had talked about it's really important to separate your work from what you were doing in your kind of PhD postdoc role. What is some advice to how to do that transition? How do you pivot from what you were studying under your supervisor to your brand new area?
I guess people have different approaches to research. If I think about people in my area or my discipline, some people can spend their whole career focused on one disease or one protein even. Say, for example, you want to be an expert in von Willebrand's disease and you spend your whole life studying von Willebrand's factor. I would personally get bored studying any one thing, and I rather like to think about the whole person and focus on a bunch of different processes that might end up resulting in an imbalance between clot formation and clot breakdown and result in a clotting problem or thrombosis. And by being nimble, you can identify areas that are interesting and are going to appeal to reviewers of grants and reviewers of papers. And I always start with a clinical question, and then I can go back to the bench and using a reductionist approach can address that question at the bench and then maybe take it even to an animal model to test the hypothesis and then bring it back to the patient. So that bedside to bench and back again approach has been my approach to research that is clinically meaningful and hasn't failed me yet, and has been a really rewarding way of doing meaningful research. And I think it's important for everybody to find an area of passion, dive into it, find the appropriate mentors, and it may be, different mentors for different projects, and then establish yourself. You don't have to start off in isolation. Research is often a team effort. You can work within a team, but within that team, you really need over time to kind of carve out your own niche so that you can be known for something and become an expert in something. And that then will lead to new opportunities.
I'm a biostatistician by training, and one of the well-known quotes by John Tukey is that when you are a biostatistician, you tend to play in everybody's backyard. The reason being, we are all about methods primarily, and methods tend to be applicable to many different clinical type problems. and therefore, you get to get involved in different clinical problems. However, it's equally as important as a professional to really balance your support role, help others solve clinical problems, and your leadership role to advance your own expertise. And this is really how you build credibility. And so focusing on some niche area where you can go deeper to advance your own expertise and credibility, it's essential. I actually focus primarily in clinical trials as my area of expertise. And within clinical trials, I even went further to actually go deeper into pilot and feasibility studies, because that's where I saw the the biggest gap in practice. And that led to a whole host of other avenues in terms of how we could improve the field in pilot and feasibility studies, including creating a new journal for these types of work. So it's always good to actually, as you go broader, to have more collaborations, balance that with your own leadership to build credibility as an expert in a specific area.
I can imagine as a biostatistician, you're playing in many backyards. And, I've involved biostatisticians that I've worked with, not only in clinical studies, but also in animal studies. So when we do a clinical trial and we do a double-blind trial and we randomize patients, for example, to one treatment or another, I think it's important to do the same thing with animal studies. So we keep it double-blind, so the people who are doing the study don't know what treatment is being given, or if we can't do it that way, then at least with analysis of the output, it's done by someone who's blinded to which treatment the animal was assigned, and the animals are randomized, and we try and balance male and female animals in the study, because there could be important differences. So all of those same techniques that apply to clinical trials can also apply to studies in animals.
It's interesting how you're both pointing out, like Lehana is talking about being a bit of a broader methodologist, and then even as time went on, narrowing to even a more expert area of methods. And Jeff's talking about kind of bench to bedside, back to bench for looking at different problems and keeping some variety there, but still within your umbrella of expertise. And in our preparation, we talked a little bit about striking out to a new direction or staying and going more narrow. So it seems like maybe slightly different ways of approaching things. And is there generally advice about which way to go, or is it just kind of follow your passion? And when do people start to think about this? Is there a specific time in the career, do you think, that people start to think about this?
Well, I think as you start in your first faculty position, you begin to identify your direction. But I think you need to be nimble. If there are opportunities that come along, then grab them. So for example, I was asked to solve a problem that was occurring in a pair of clinical trials. And by going back to the bench to address that problem, not only did we identify a solution for the problem to allow the trial to go to completion, but we also identified a whole new area of research that's led to new collaborations and new methods, and has become now another thrust of my research program. So sometimes you can be led through a problem to new directions in research, and you can take advantage of that and then look for totally new collaborations.
When I started, although I was focusing in clinical trials, I never in a million years imagined that pilot and feasibility trials would be one of my areas of focus. But it happened simply because of opportunity. I used to sit on the research ethics board, something that I've done for many years. And one of the most frustrating things was proposals of people claiming to be doing pilot and feasibility studies. And quite often the methodology was actually terribly done. And as I saw many of these submissions coming through the Research Ethics Board, and then I saw them coming through panels at CIHR, which is our funding agency. And I saw them actually submitted through journals of people claiming to be reporting pilot and feasibility studies. And the methods were terribly poor. So it was through my experiences with all these frustrations that I wrote a paper which actually changed the direction of my research to pilot and feasibility trials as it is today. And it was a therapeutic paper for me, written out of frustrations, but opened a whole opportunities of collaborations with colleagues in the UK. And we now focused on changing the practice by starting with how to encourage people to report them better. But that also provided an opportunity to actually see how do we provide a forum for them to actually publish them, and led to the creation of a journal for which I'm the co-editor-in-chief. So you can see how being open to opportunities can also lead to exciting career opportunities. So I think being nimble, as Jeff suggests, it's also helpful.
Yeah, I think that's an important lesson too, is that I often advise my mentees that in order to recognize excellence, you have to see it. And how do you see it? Well, get yourself on the grant review panels, for example, and then you'll see what a good grant looks like and what a not so good grant looks like. Work on the Research Ethics Board. I was on the Research Ethics Board for something like 20 years, and then you see, what's a good trial look like from the methodology? What does a good consent form look like? And get yourself on the editorial boards for journals. And of course, by doing so, getting on these grant panels or editorial boards, those are indicators of national and international recognition, which also then help you not only to identify excellence, but also help you when it comes time for promotion to use as indicators that you've achieved national and international recognition in your field.
That is such a great learning experience, I've found too, to do the grant reviews and learn about so many different methodologies and how to do them well. Yeah, those are great stories of staying on focus, but being a little bit nimble and going with opportunities, but still maintaining kind of the core of what your purpose is.